Hello dear viewers and welcome to the second interview with Mr. Alexander Laurent. Mr. Laurent, thank you very much for coming to us for a second time, and for answering a few more questions and taking us deeper into the rabbit hole. In return, I would like to briefly summarize what you have to say about yourself. More than 6 years ago you published your novel The Apocalypse of God, a Revelation, under your author's pseudonym Alexander Laurent, and then sent your novel unasked and anonymously to 214 people. To people who belong, as you say, to a special area of life and work, as well as to public figures who, then as now, design and produce broadcasting formats in the alternative media. In the time after your book was sent out, the prophecies of the future you had kept hidden and encoded in the novel were gradually fulfilled, in the form of historical and news events which the unsolicited recipients of the novel were to recognize. In order to be able to recognize and verify this, you wrote a blog that shows all readers of the novel these predictions, thereby simultaneously documenting the novel's authenticity, origin, and destination. Because in our last interview you emphasized that your novel is about manipulation by dark entities, a literary work produced by extraterrestrial and demonic entities, including an AI, which you call Yahweh, who all want to bring humanity into a certain direction of development. Among other things, these entities tried to do so with this literary work. On the other hand, today we are also influenced by other entities, people, as you say, a future humanity that intervenes without being noticed by the dark entities that are watching us. Influences and changes from these people of the future have been incorporated into the novel, which have been integrated into the novel piggyback, so to speak, via the dark entities, thus creating a second reading of your novel. For the viewer, this novel can be downloaded for free. Just click on the links below this video and read the accompanying blog. Well, this short introduction without details and more detailed explanations may sound a bit strange to many people who have not seen the first interview, and it seems to be complicated material. Therefore, we would like to advise all viewers who, despite the introduction to this interview, are still interested in this topic, to watch our first interview first, so that they can follow the content of this second interview later on.
Correct. Thank you very much for the introduction and the continuation of the previous interview. Hello dear viewers. Thank you very much for tuning in for the second interview. I wish you a fearless listening and further on a good conversation, as far as this does not sound impious in view of some gruesome but nevertheless necessary topics to be addressed. 8. In the previous interview I described the deeper reasons and causes for our situation on Earth. Therefore, I do not want to go into all the complex structures and causes that are hidden behind the visible events on Earth. But I want to follow up on the previous interview by going into the additions and deeper details behind and within this controlled by external entities. Entities that do not see or have not seen themselves as negative influences, but which definitely belong to the dark or negative constructive influence that they exert towards intelligences that want to develop in a self-determined way, i.e. towards us.
Negative constructive, that is an interesting word creation. By this you mean that this species club, which has watched and guided us humans on Earth for thousands of years, has a specific philosophical ideology according to which these beings legitimize their actions and direct their interventions. So if I may anticipate from our preliminary discussion, this is a kind of good-evil principle, according to which there would only be progress and development in space if there were a working of good and evil elements, so that progress and development would take place. What does this mean? What does it mean that these dark powers want to transform and redesign the world according to a philosophical pattern, applying a special good-evil principle?
The philosophy of these beings is the belief, or rather the erroneous view, that the development of an intelligent species in the universe or nature itself can only progress and evolve if it is destroyed, decomposed and recreated on these ruins, in a struggle between positive and negative acting elements, in a kind of intensified selection and refinement, one could also say. This would be a principle found everywhere in existence that would bring about progress and evolutionary development. And only this principle could guarantee development and progress. Otherwise there is the threat of extinction, which they could observe and prove with numerous examples of other intelligent species in space. Therefore, they influence intelligent species and so-called evolutionary developments in the cosmos on very many planets and moons, because they believe that otherwise intelligent living beings could miss the chance for further and even higher development and would eventually die out and perish.
So there is actually a constructive background to this influence, although this club is destructive in its approach, as you said, negative constructive?
Yes, you might think that it would be something constructive. But it is only in a broad and philosophically and scientifically substantiated interpretation of observation. In the way of thinking and conviction of these beings, it is an auxiliary approach. Yes, out of negative things positive things are created. But on closer inspection this philosophy is extremely cross or incomplete and not thought through to the end, which I will talk about in detail later. First, I would like to talk about where on Earth we find these extraterrestrial philosophies and influences. Because for the implementation of progress and development by means of the action of good and evil, i.e. by means of an antagonistic or dualistic principle, human groups are needed on Earth to initiate, control and maintain this process. The secret philosophy taught in these groups, which impressively underpins the truthfulness of this philosophical good-evil principle by means of numerous proofs, mechanisms and healing methods, finally leads these people to believe with all conviction that only in this way and through their work, i.e. by bringing in positive as well as negative influences on people on this planet, can there be prosperity, progress, peace and happiness, and that only from this can the development towards a superhuman existence arise. To transform man, and any other intelligent species, into a digital, immortal species is a natural constant. There is no other way. For other ways of life, which do not consist of struggle, emaciation and suffering, lead to a moderation and finally to disintegration, would therefore be senseless and dangerous. This means that too much peace, prosperity, happiness and agreement would ultimately only lead to stagnation, dissolution and technical and mental regression, ultimately to the extinction and death of an intelligent species.
How can too much prosperity, peace, consensuality and happiness lead to regression?
Let me explain it using a conceptual model of these extraterrestrial entities. Suppose that a happy people live on an island where there is everything you need to live: food in abundance, joy, fun, health, peace, long life, physical and emotional fulfillment, and harmonious socializing with other people. A dream, a wonderful life for every human being. But in the long run, this would inhibit the interest in development and progress. All this would no longer result in any effort for technological, let alone high-tech developments. In the long run, it would lead to inertia, because no other paths would have to be taken or adjustments made to survive. So there would be no progress, no technological progress, because nothing would have to change fundamentally, or change would not be necessary at all. It can stay as it is because it is perfect at the moment. Perfect until the moment when an external influence destroys everything, eliminates everything, and this destructive influence comes, always, sometime. That is one of the reasons why there must be a drive, a change in development, otherwise an intelligent species would simply disappear at some point. This is the thoroughly convincing opinion of this extraterrestrial club. That nothing changes and even regresses is, in their opinion, a waste and senselessness of existence, or cannot be the goal of existence. In order to give meaning to existence, or to maintain this meaning, or to create it at all, there must be constant reasons or drives for a species to develop in a certain direction, especially technically. And this can only be done by restricting, cutting, and blocking human beings in their lives. This opens up new potentials, aspirations, and development opportunities. And this is the only reason why we humans are where we are now, both technologically and spiritually. At least that is what this philosophical direction believes. It is order out of chaos, or rather, development and progress out of impairment. Now one could get angry about what they 10 have done to us here on Earth. On the one hand, angry against the earthly groupings, i.e. certain elites and leaders, and on the other hand angry against the extraterrestrial club that is stalking us. But you shouldn't hold it against them, because especially these alien species are intuitively too simple to know how short-thought all this is. This species club has itself been taken by surprise, irritated, and manipulated. I already described the causes in the previous interview.
Where are these earthly supporters? Where can you find them?
Everywhere. Really everywhere. Not only in the often secretive hierarchical power structures of the elites, secret societies, behind influential families, companies, the moneyed aristocracy, or religions. No, they are everywhere. They are even represented in the constructive spheres of influence that are supposedly working against them. For they have to operate the overall construct from all sides, which is why they are naturally just as numerous and hidden in the so-called good spheres of influence. This means that these philosophical groups and secret societies support the bad as well as the good elements in the world. So that from these two diametrically opposed camps finally struggle, chaos, confusion, and decomposition can arise in order to let the fruitful and useful emerge. In both the good and the bad influences in this world, there are therefore equally important control elements of that philosophical good-evil way of thinking which organizes, directs, and drives the whole thing forward. The good then talk about the cover-ups and terrible conditions that the bad have caused, then also about spirituality, about awakening, about biofood, about love, alternative medicine, about freedom, about everything that is logically really good. Because these things are good, and of course most people who have such ideals and want to put them into practice are real. 98% of these constructive people are real good people. However, 2% of the people working in these areas are stimulating and controlling elements that come from the good-evil philosophy of the secret societies. Basically, however, they are also genuinely convinced of the constructive point of view that they represent to the outside world. But many of the real good people are not even aware or enlightened about the fact that in their fight against the equally staged and promoted evil they are used by that good-evil principle that prevails in this world. Often they are not even remotely aware that they are guided by the same principle as the bad and destructive people of this world who have chosen or have been inspired to choose selfish and mean behavior. Both are supported, both are encouraged. Do you understand? This means that constructive as well as destructive deeds, qualities, goals or ideas in our world are brought into such a position against each other that slowly and insidiously chaos, wear and tear and destruction arise. Thus, convincingly after all the disintegrating chaos that will be caused on Earth, a new orientation, progress and development will be initiated. That is the goal, that is all that matters, that is the New World Order. So ironically the fear of the New World Order is even being used to build the New World Order. This is how progress and development have always been organized on Earth. At every point in our present history of civilization, and also in all previous high-tech civilizations before that, by which I do not mean a cultural high civilization, but high-tech global civilizations which had already emerged twice many thousands of years ago. Well, even if progress, development and prosperity are to emerge from the current chaos and plan of the club and the digital nobility, ultimately nothing positive will come of it, because the long-term goal of the club with its half-baked good-evil principle is ultimately to lead to the digitalization of human biology. And this is a huge problem for humanity, as I will explain in more detail later, in this interview.
But that also means that somehow even the 98% of completely normal, real people, who primarily expose the grievances and misery, are actually part of and ignorant helpers of this good-evil principle, and therefore also the people who out of selfishness or seduction set negative developments in motion?
Yes, most of the good and bad people don't know anything about it. They are real, but only tools and staffage. Average people, who have been educated by the controlled and influenced elements, i.e. by the media, enforced progress, lifestyle, historiography or pushed social developments in such a way that they act so indoctrinated, convinced and incited that they automatically take a certain constructive or even destructive position in life. These people are, so to speak, the foot soldiers, who are real and have been guided accordingly by good or bad control elements, but know nothing about it. The leaders and influencers from these philosophical groups are usually only found at the top in public institutions, movements, companies, or in higher politics. So if real influence is to be exerted from the philosophical groups and a certain direction is to be taken, trustworthy and highest members of these philosophical groups and secret societies are hoisted into very high public positions, from where they can direct, accuse, or determine. They are usually very well-known public figures whom everyone knows.
So the most trustworthy are to be found at the very top of the publicly visible hierarchies?
Yes, mostly. But not always. Depending on what these groupings are supposed to do.
In the middle and lower of these groupings, where do you find them?
You mean those with half, low or false knowledge. That is, those who are trained with different variants of this philosophy and different reasons for the whole procedure on Earth. If, for example, you read a book about crime, which in Germany is constantly increasing and getting worse, you can say with 15% certainty that the accusing author is a middle or lower representative of these groups. These authors are in turn badmouthed in public, belittled and torn apart by the media, but are indirectly promoted, regardless of whether they belong to the groupings or not. Propaganda against them boosts their popularity, and so their credibility increases, because they are fighting for something good or just. And that is what they do. They are usually completely convinced of it, even if they belong to these groups. For the philosophical groups, the goal of all these actions is of course only to show the people the grievances and thus in the long term to incite the populations against each other by noticeably suppressing their voices in public opinion or by visibly creating lawlessness and acting undemocratically. It finally leads to the incitement of people against each other and to escalation and in the worst case eventually to war and chaos, which is the real aim of the whole production. In order to increase the pressure, the negative and positive groups of these elites work against each other, not necessarily always in exact coordination, but predominantly with uninitiated or incorrectly and misinformed people, whose role is genuine in order to be able to stage convincingly. In order to avoid leaks within this system, not too many people should be in the know. So there are a lot of people who are genuine and don't know anything, or they are people with little or false knowledge who assume a completely different reason or cause for what is happening. This deception is less noticeable to the average person, because the representatives of these two blocks are 100% committed to their cause. Because they are all real, no matter whether they are real free spirits or members of one of the philosophical groups. In this way the pressure in the pot rises in a better and more controlled way without internal leaks that could completely expose the system working behind it. It is a perfectly coordinated theater play in which the roles are clearly distributed and a leakage of the true background is virtually impossible or, in the case of cases, can be put into perspective in the public presentation because the lower and middle employees of the positive as well as the negative block credibly seal the whole thing with their half-knowledge. All this is the magic formula to stage seriously in public, not only because the performers of these positive and negative blocks simply play their roles well, but because the performers actually are those roles. Because everyone in this hierarchy knows or believes something different, and some know more, some know less, some have false knowledge or are completely disinformed about everything. You can find this method everywhere. In every area. It is a perfectly disguised and absolutely successful implementation of the extraterrestrial good-evil philosophy.
So these people need camouflage. And artificial blocks are built up to implement the good-evil principle. This is how the implementation of control and guidance works?
Yes. These groups are the good and the bad, whereby the concepts of good and evil are also named differently, or you could also interpret the two blocks in reverse, depending on where you stand. But that is actually secondary. From the philosophical natural law taught to them, which is accompanied by impressively applicable medical or technical methods of operation, and thus apparently also underpinning and proving their correctness, everything in it is logically comprehensible for these people. That is why only very few of them struggle with it when they find themselves in one of these groups and are explained exactly what it is all about. For those of them who still do not feel justified in enforcing evil are free to take over the good side of the game. Nevertheless, this seemingly undeniably correct philosophy is exclusively a method by which all these people have been lured so that they feel legitimized in their actions.
So is everything now permeated by this extraterrestrial philosophy? Because even normal people are aligned with these philosophical themes and schools of thought and help to enforce them? So can we no longer trust anyone in higher or guiding positions with their goals and ideals?
No. It is not that bad. But people are very much interspersed from it. You should be very suspicious of everything that in the long or short term pushes a technical and social development that promotes or supports the digitalization of humanity via invisible, intricate paths. In the sense of a liberation from work, effort, capitalism, money, and income dependency. You should be very suspicious. That is the best thing. But you should not suspect everyone, that would be just as counterproductive. The important thing is to be aware of this. For there are also many real truthers and seekers of truth in the alternative media, but they themselves are deliberately influenced by the few infiltrating individuals of the infiltrating good-evil system, or directed, or, if necessary, even destroyed.
Yes. Well, actually we have met again here because you want to tell us more details about the plans and machinations of the club and digital nobility. Also because you said that according to the good-evil principle you, Mr. Laurent, have the right to influence the future that the elites are striving for, if there is an active possibility to do so. And you can offer this solution to the elites who are looking for an alternative solution. What is this solution? What do you mean?
There is a clear plan of how what is coming up is going to happen. This means that elites in secret societies, ideologically trained by the club and nobility, have been planning and building cruel events for a very long time to nudge humanity in the digital direction. To this end, several staged catastrophic events are to break humanity and then convince it religiously of the path to be taken. For in order to be able to stably initiate the next developmental step towards biological digitalization, a decimation and subsequent spiritual purification of humanity is required. Catastrophic events, in other words, which should lead humanity to where the elites, nobility and the club think it should be led. In the last 100 years, trained elites and indoctrinated people have basically worked primarily on this, even if they were not given this goal exactly or at all.
So something is happening that is supposed to change people spiritually or religiously. And these elites and groups use this to reposition themselves, to steer humanity in a certain direction?
Exactly. And according to their philosophy, this can also be prevented or changed. That is the freedom of development that must be granted to a species. So if it specifically opposes this direction, that is what I mean by the fact that the elites have a choice to decide whether humanity would not be better directed in another direction.
Let's come to the powers behind these philosophical groupings. Who guides and commands the intervention in the constructive and destructive areas of the world? How do they organize everything?
It is a system of levels in which there are two sides. In it, however, all power, financial and/or thought-controlling influence is combined. These two sides are in diametric competition with each other, but they all have the same mission and therefore work together again in a fair competition, like football players in a football match or within a football association. This means that although the players are opponents in sporting competition, in this umbrella organization of the association they are all united with each other and change teams from time to time, but only within their either good or bad areas. You cannot go from good to bad or vice versa. And just like in football, it's all just a show, with the difference that it's not a game, it's serious. But they are all in the same association from the outset, the association to control and guide mankind towards a higher goal.
And the goal is digitalization?
Yes, first of all to adapt humanity to the club of the aliens that are stalking us in terms of life and existence, and then to have our species integrated into this club. That is the long-term goal, the real goal. Everything else is only stages, sub-goals, and folklore, what has to be achieved to fulfill the agenda of this club. Because we should develop in this direction in the most natural way possible as best we can. But actually this credo of the club is a farce, because nothing was ever initiated without their influence. Nothing about our development is real. All the technical and civilizing systems of the distant and near past came from them, and were normally played into our brains as ideas, were forced upon us by them and functioned fundamentally against our own human nature. Even the so-called exodus of Homo sapiens from Africa to other continents, about 50,000 years ago, the mixing with other human species to form a genus, or even agriculture, were initiated and directed by them. After mixing of all human species or even partial displacement of other species, the first high civilizations could start, which produced the first high-tech global civilization. And this did not start 5,000 years ago and ended in our currently globally organized world, but happened many thousands of years earlier. 5,000 years ago mankind already had two initiated global civilizations behind it. The whole of humanity, including Neanderthal man and other human species existing alongside, lived and organized themselves until more than 50,000 years ago, all of them in tribes, in small tribal societies, spread all over the globe, even before the historically taught exodus from Africa began 50,000 years ago. These very early humans lived freely and completely uninfluenced, and about 70,000 years ago, due to a natural event, they were an intellectual spiritual species doomed to extinction. Like so many other spiritual species of the cosmos, they only wanted to experience themselves as intelligent beings, as human beings. That was all that mattered, but this club does not understand that. They don't really know what this whole experience in this seven-dimensional prison is all about. They know nothing. That is why the club has intervened massively in our development during this natural event 70,000 years ago, which would have caused the extinction of mankind. First saved numerous tribes all over the planet, then resettled them and then intervened in our natural way of life, structuring and development. In this way, they formed us according to their own model of development, pushing us into a civilizing development, with the aim of the extreme technicization of man.
But if they hadn't done that, wouldn't humanity be able to become the liberator of all from this dimensional prison?
Correct. But we have always been rescued in every potential course of human history in four-dimensional space, by this club, always. There has never been a potentiality in which this did not happen, because the AI always commanded it. Because it is an acausally determined cycle of the seven-dimensional existence. Do you understand? It's about the causality of the dimension levels. A causality. But we have always escaped, and we will also escape again in this cycle and thus finally be able to free all others in the long run.
You are now suggesting that these aliens actually have a very aimless life and existence perspective. Their aimlessness is that they have no idea what this existence is really about. That they have, so to speak, reached a dead end with their way of life. And you should not turn into this dead end, so to speak?
Yes, correct. This club is a pretty big club. It has the philosophical attitude to travel around in space, to research, discover and support. He sees sense in that. That is part of his philosophy. The purpose and task of his existence. A club, consisting and supported by species that want to travel and explore space in the same way. This is the meaning of life for them. And in the thin perspective of being able to develop with each other. In truth, however, this club we are supposed to join is a club of conquerors and explorers that has lost its meaning, a club that gives development aid.
Ah. But a more critical question, what is so bad for mankind about this club?
Forced entry into this club is the big problem. For this entry, an intelligent species must become biologically completely digital, digitally transformed, digitally exist. And we should enter there, either there or nowhere. And biological digitalization is the only way to enter this club, because all species of this club or the individuals of this club can only travel around in space digitally. This is the only way to travel in space at all and to cover long distances. There are no drives at super light speed. This is physically impossible to realize. At light speed all matter dissolves. The material laws of the universe also apply to these beings. And that is the problem. For there is only the digital method of traveling back and forth between the stars. In order for all this to take place as planned and for us to be able to contact and join the club later, all the positive and negative stuff about crop circles, UFOs and pyramids is spread around the world. About ancient and religious myths, belief systems, rumors of extraterrestrial visits or alleged time travel. That's why there are science fiction movies and science fiction series. All these interventions are merely the mental preparation for the encounter with this extraterrestrial club. Because no matter whether there is unrestrained exaggeration or even lying about all the stuff of pop culture, e.g. about the feasibility of time travel in four-dimensional space, or whether people simply talk about real existing phenomena, such as pyramids, it is always all about making people aware of extraterrestrial or seemingly paranormal phenomena, no matter how they come across. All of this has been dumped into the alternative and mainstream media, willingly or unwillingly, consciously or unconsciously, for many decades by so-called UFO researchers, SO and Sci lackeys. And all these stories are either completely lies or distorted and reinterpreted truths, which are used for spiritual adjustment during and after the time of disaster, in order to bring people back into a very, very old religious system in order to make them believe that the aliens are good, always wanted to help us or were worried about us. And no matter if the aliens intervene or not, or if they show up sooner or later, the whole theater play serves the way into digitalization, nothing more. At some point, the most useful and credible way to unravel all these earthly phenomena will be presented in public. To explain the apparently covert actions of these aliens, why they were holding back, where they were taking care of us everywhere, and that they contacted the evil earthly rulers, but these rulers did not want any contact or change. It is explained why there are pyramids, what these buildings are supposed to be, and that we are technically and socially on the right track, etc. Everything to let the enthusiasm boil up and to keep it up, for the further way of mankind into digitalization.